All eyes were on the Alpha King, except the wolfless Omega who refused to impress him. "He's looking this way, Callista. Adjust your bodice." "Let him look, Norabel. The soup is cold, and that is a far more pressing tragedy than the direction of a monarch's gaze. Do you want to die a spinster in the servants' quarters? Lift your chin. Alistair Kingshold is deciding the fate of the pack tonight. If his decision relies on my chin, then the pack is doomed regardless." Callista didn't blink. She didn't shift, while every heart in the grand hall hammered a frantic rhythm for the Alpha King. Callista simply picked up her spoon, blew gently on the broth, and turned the page of the book hidden in her lap. A suffocating cocktail of expensive perfume and predatory instinct filled the grand hall of the lunar summit, turning the vast space into a dizzying vortex of noise. It smelled of desperation, expensive perfumes masking the musk of ambitious she-wolves, the metallic tang of anxiety, and the overwhelming ozone-thick scent of power radiating from the throne. Alistair Kingshold sat there like a statue, carved from obsidian and gold. He was bored. It was a dangerous, predatory boredom that made the air around him feel thin. He was the alpha of alphas, the king of the United Packs, a man whose wolf was rumored to be large enough to crush a carriage in its jaws. His eyes, a startling electric violet, swept over the sea of women presented before him. They preened. They giggled. They arched their backs to accentuate their curves, desperate for a mate, or at least a mistress's contract. And then there was the girl in the grey wool dress. She was seated at the far end of the lowest table, the one reserved for the unfavoured, the Omegas, the weak-blooded, and the servants. In a room exploding with colour, scarlet silks, emerald velvets, sapphires dripping from throats, she was a smudge of ash. "Who is that?" Alistair's voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the music, yet Victor Hollowheart, his Grand Vizier, heard it instantly. Victor, a man whose smile always looked like a grimace of pain, followed the king's gaze. He squinted. "That? A nobody, sire. Callista of the Lowlands, a tragedy of genetics, wolfless. She has no inner spirit. She is essentially human, kept only because her father was a decorated soldier before his passing." Alistair leaned forward, the gold chains on his chest clinking softly. "She hasn't looked at me once." It was true. For the last hour, while Leocadia, the Duke's daughter, had practically performed a mating dance in front of the dais, and Miralyn had, accidentally, tripped to showcase her vulnerability, the girl in grey had been eating soup and reading. "She knows her place, my king," Victor said smoothly, though his eyes narrowed. A wolfless wretch would not dare meet the gaze of the apex. "No," Alistair corrected, his nostrils flaring slightly. "It isn't fear. I can smell fear. The room reeks of it. She smells like old paper and rainwater. There is no adrenaline in her blood." Down at the table, Callista felt the weight of the room shift, but she refused to acknowledge it. She turned the page of The Theoretical History of Lycanthropy. The soup really was tepid, a culinary crime, in her opinion. "Callista," hissed Norabel, her cousin, who was wearing a dress 3 sizes too tight in a shade of pink that offended the eyes. "Stop reading. The king is whispering to Lord Hollowheart. They are looking at us." "They are looking at you, Norabel," Callista lied effortlessly, dipping a piece of stale bread into the broth. "You look like a strawberry tart. Men like tarts. You are impossible. You are an embarrassment to the family name. I have no wolf, Norabel. Therefore I have no family name to embarrass. I am just the furniture." Suddenly, the music stopped. The heavy oak doors at the front of the hall slammed open, and a hush fell over the crowd. The presentation was beginning. This was the moment the high-born females would release their scents. A magical, chemical display intended to entice the king's inner wolf. Leocadia stepped forward first. She was stunning, a vision in crimson with hair like spun gold. She closed her eyes and released her aura, the room filled with the scent of wild roses and blood, a powerful, intoxicating mix. Alistair didn't flinch. He waved a hand, dismissing her. Marilyn was next. Vanilla and spice. Dismissed. Dama Crestfall, a dark beauty from the northern clans, stepped up. Pine Needles and Frost. Dismissed. The tension in the room grew suffocating. The king was rejecting the finest lineages in the kingdom. His irritation was becoming palpable, a physical weight pressing down on everyone's shoulders. The weaker wolves began to whine, their instincts forcing them to bare their throats in submission to his rising anger. Callista sighed, closing her book. Great, she thought. Now he's going to have a tantrum, and we'll be locked in here for another hour. She stood up. It wasn't a challenge, it was purely practical. She intended to slip out the back service door while everyone was paralyzed by the king's mood. She grabbed her empty bowl, intending to drop it at the scullery on her way out. Clink. In the absolute silence of the rejected court, her spoon hitting the ceramic bowl sounded like a gunshot. Every head turned. 700 pairs of eyes, and one pair of violet ones. Alistair stood up. Callista froze. She wasn't afraid of him. A side effect of being wolfless was that she lacked the submissive instinct that crippled others in his presence. But she was annoyed. She had almost made it to the shadows. You, Alistair said. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried to the rafters. The one leaving. Callista slowly turned. She didn't curtsy. She didn't lower her eyes. She just looked at him, clutching her book in one hand and her dirty soup bowl in the other. Me, Your Majesty, she asked, her tone polite but entirely devoid of awe. Where are you going? To the kitchen, sire. The soup was cold. I assumed the evening was over, given that you seem to hate flowers, vanilla, and pine. The collective gasp of the court sucked the air out of the room. Victor Hollowheart looked as if he might have a stroke. Leocadia's mouth hung open. Alistair stared at her. For a second, the violence in his eyes sharpened, and then, shockingly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Come here, he commanded. I have a bowl, sire. Bring the bowl. Callista hesitated, then walked up the long center aisle. The high-born ladies parted like the Red Sea, sneering at her grey wool dress. She ascended the dais steps and stopped 3 feet from the most dangerous predator on the continent. Up close, he was terrifying. He was too big, too beautiful, and radiated a heat that made her skin prickle. But Callista was a scholar of history, and history taught that kings were just men who bled like anyone else. You are wolfless, Alistair said, sniffing the air near her. It's like staring into a void. I am told it is a defect, Callista replied calmly, like a table with a short leg. And yet, Alistair stepped closer, invading her personal space. You are the only one in this room whose heart isn't trying to escape their ribs. Why? Because I have nothing you want, Alistair Kingshold, she said, using his full name, a treasonous offense. I am not beautiful. I have no magic. I cannot give you strong airs. I am just a girl who likes her soup hot and her books quiet. You have no power over someone who desires nothing from you. The king stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. The court held its breath, waiting for the execution. What book is it? He asked softly. Callista blinked, surprised for the first time. Theory of Lycanthropy, Volume 4. The chapter on the lunar madness? No, the chapter on the failure of the alpha bloodline due to inbreeding and arrogance. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Alistair threw his head back and laughed. It was a booming, genuine sound that shook the dust from the chandeliers. "Get her fresh soup," the king roared to the terrified servants. "And bring a chair. She sits with me." The scandal of the Unity Feast had morphed into a week-long crisis. The Wolfless wench, as the court now called her, had dined with the king. They hadn't danced, they hadn't flirted. They had debated history and politics, while the eligible bachelorettes stood by the walls, wilting like neglected flowers. Callista, however, had no interest in being a favourite. The moment the dinner had ended, she had vanished back into obscurity, refusing the silk dresses Victor Hollowheart had sent to her room. Now she sought refuge in the only place that made sense: the Royal Archives. It was a labyrinth of dust and leather, rising 3 stories high. Callista sat on a rolling ladder in the section regarding ancient treaties, enjoying the silence. The politics of the court were a headache. The logic of the archives was soothing. You are hard to find. Callista didn't jump, but she did close her eyes briefly in resignation. She looked down. Alistair was standing at the bottom of her ladder. He wasn't wearing his crown or his ceremonial armour today. He was in a simple black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms scarred from countless battles. He looked less like a king and more like a soldier who had lost his way. "I am not hiding, sire," she said, looking down at him. "I am researching." "Researching what? How to insult more dignitaries?" "I didn't insult them. I merely pointed out that Duke Crestthorne's taxation policy is mathematically unsustainable. He wanted to challenge you to a duel." "And I would have won," Callista said, climbing down the ladder. "He relies on brute force. I would have simply put a banana peel on the stairs." Alistair chuckled, leaning against a mahogany table. The dynamic between them was strange. To him, she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. To her, he was a distraction. "Why are you here, Alistair?" She dropped the honorifics again. They felt heavy in the quiet library. "My advisors are driving me mad," he admitted, running a hand through his dark hair. "Victor wants me to marry Leocadia to secure the southern borders. The council wants me to marry Dharma to secure the northern iron mines. Every conversation is a transaction." "That is the price of the crown," Callista said, placing a stack of books on the table. "You are not a man. You are a commodity. A very expensive stud horse." Alistair's eyes flashed dangerous violet. He moved with a blur of speed, pinning her against the bookshelf. It wasn't violent, but it was dominant. His hands rested on the shelves on either side of her head, caging her in. "Careful, little Omega," he growled, his voice dropping an octave. "I am still a wolf. I do not like being mocked." Callista looked up at him. She could feel the heat radiating from his chest. She could smell the scent of him. Firewood, snow, and something sharp like steel. "I am not mocking you," she whispered, refusing to shrink away. "I am telling you the truth. Everyone else lies to you. They tell you you are a god. I am telling you that you are lonely." The anger drained out of him, replaced by a stark, naked vulnerability that terrified her more than his rage. He leaned in, his nose brushing against her jawline. He inhaled deeply, searching for a scent that wasn't there. "Why are you empty?" he murmured. "It drives my wolf insane. I can't read you. I can't feel your emotions. You are a ghost." "Maybe that makes me the safest person in your castle," she said. "I can't manipulate your instincts if I don't have any." He pulled back slightly, studying her face. "Victor thinks you are a spy. He thinks your wolflessness is a magical cloak. Victor sees daggers in soup spoons. He says you were seen speaking to the rogue factions in the market." Callista stiffened. It was a microscopic reaction, but Alistair caught it. His eyes narrowed. "I buy apples in the market," she said, her voice steady. "Callista." His tone was a warning. Before she could answer, the heavy oak doors of the library creaked open. Alistair immediately stepped back, the mask of the indifferent king slamming back into place. It was Leocadia, followed closely by Miralyn. They stopped, their eyes darting from the king to Callista, realizing they had interrupted an intimate moment. "Your Majesty," Leocadia purred, dropping into a deep curtsy that displayed ample cleavage. "We have been searching for you. The hunt is about to begin." Alistair looked at Callista one last time. His eyes were full of questions she had no intention of answering. "I will be there," Alistair said coldly to Leocadia. Then he looked at Callista. "And so will she." "Me?" Callista blurted. "I don't hunt. I trip over tree roots." "Then you can watch," Alistair commanded. "I want you in the procession." He swept out of the room, his cape billowing behind him. Leocadia lingered for a moment, glaring at Callista with eyes that promised a slow and painful death. "You are playing a dangerous game, servant," Leocadia hissed. "He will grow bored of your novelty. And when he does, I will be the one to clean up the mess." "If you clean as well as you curtsy, Leocadia," Callista replied dryly, "you'll miss all the dirt in the corners." The royal hunt was a barbaric display of masculinity that Callista despised. The forest edge was lined with viewing pavilions draped in silk, where the court drank wine and wagered on which stag the king would bring down. Callista sat in the corner of the main pavilion, trying to make herself invisible. It wasn't working. The invitation from the king had put a target on her back the size of the moon. "Wine, Lady Callista." The voice was oily. Callista looked up to see Victor Hollowheart standing over her. He held a crystal goblet, the red liquid sloshing against the rim. "Water is fine, Lord Hollowheart." "Oh, come now. Celebration is in order. You have captivated the king, a remarkable feat for someone of your standing." He sat down, uninvited. "Tell me, child, what is it you want? Gold? A title? A release from service?" "I want to read my book," she said bluntly. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You are clever. Too clever. You know, there are rumors about your father, that he didn't die of natural causes, that he was involved in dark alchemy, trying to suppress the wolf gene." Callista's fingers tightened on the fabric of her dress. "My father was a soldier. He was a scientist, Callista. Is that why you have no wolf? Did he cut it out of you?" "Leave me alone," she said, standing up. She tried to move past him, but Miralyn and Norabel were suddenly there, blocking her path. They were giggling, feigning drunkenness, but their eyes were malicious. "Oh, look!" Miralyn shrieked. "The Wolfless Wonder is leaving." "Careful," Norabel sneered. "Don't touch her. Bad luck might be contagious." Miralyn stumbled forward, a glass of red wine in her hand. With practiced precision, she dashed the contents over Callista. The cold liquid soaked into the grey wool, staining it like a fresh wound. The pavilion went silent. The high-born ladies covered their mouths to hide their smirks. "Oh no!" Miralyn cried, her voice thick with fake sympathy. "Look at you. You look like a slaughtered pig." Callista stood freezing, the wine dripping down her front. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. She looked around. No one moved to help. They were enjoying this. This was the pecking order reasserting itself. The Omega had risen too high. She needed to be kicked back down. Callista took a deep breath. She reached for a napkin to dab at the stain, but Miralyn slapped her hand away. "Don't touch the royal linen with those filthy hands." Something snapped in Callista. Not a wolfish instinct, something colder. Human rage. She looked at the glass in Miralyn's hand. "You wasted a vintage Pinot Noir, Miralyn, which is fitting, since you lack taste." "How dare you? And you?" Callista turned to Norabel. "You speak of bad luck, yet you are the one betting your dowry on a king who can't even remember your name." "You little—" Miralyn raised her hand to strike. Thwack! An arrow slammed into the wooden post of the pavilion, inches from Miralyn's nose. The fletching hummed with the force of the impact. Miralyn screamed and dropped her glass. Alistair rode out of the tree line on a massive black stallion. He held a great bow in his hand, another arrow already nocked. He wasn't looking at the stag. He was looking at the pavilion. He dismounted in one fluid motion and stormed up the steps. The crowd parted instantly, dropping to their knees. Alistair ignored them all. He walked straight to Callista. He looked at the wine soaking her dress. He looked at Miralyn, who was trembling so hard her jewelry rattled. "Who threw it?" Alistair asked. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. "It was an accident, sire," Miralyn sobbed. "I tripped." Alistair looked at the spilled wine on the floor. "You tripped upwards. The splatter pattern suggests an overhand throw." Callista looked at him, surprised. "You know ballistics?" "I know hunting," Alistair said. He took off his heavy fur cloak and draped it around Callista's shoulders. It engulfed her, heavy and warm, smelling overwhelmingly of him. It was a claim. A public, undeniable claim. "Miralyn," Alistair said, not looking away from Callista. "Leave. If I see you at court again before the winter solstice, I will have your father stripped of his rank." Miralyn fled, sobbing. Alistair looked down at Callista. "Are you hurt?" "Only my dignity," she muttered, pulling the cloak tighter. "You didn't have to shoot an arrow at her." "I missed on purpose," he shrugged. "I aim for the throat when I'm serious." "You are a barbarian, and you are wet. Come, we are leaving. The hunt isn't over." "It is now." As he escorted her toward the horses, creating a scandal that would be talked about for a century, Callista noticed something. Victor Hollowheart was watching them. He wasn't cowering like the others. He was tapping his fingers against his chin, his eyes fixated on Callista's back, and behind him, in the shadows of the tree line, a figure moved. A figure dressed in the tattered leathers of a rogue. Callista's heart hammered. Not because the king's arm was around her, but because she recognized the rogue. It was the messenger she had met in the market, and he had just signaled that the trap was set. Callista looked up at Alistair, at his strong jaw and the arrogant tilt of his head. "You think you are the hunter," she thought, a wave of guilt crashing over her. "But you are the prey, and I am the bait." She wasn't just a wolfless scholar. She was the daughter of the man Alistair's father had executed for treason. And she hadn't come to the castle to read books. She had come to destroy the throne from the inside. But as Alistair lifted her onto his horse, his hand gentle on her waist, Callista realized with a jolt of terror that the one variable she hadn't accounted for was the one thing her father had warned her against. She was starting to like him. The royal study was less a room and more a fortress of solitude. Walls lined with ancient mahogany shelves groaned under the weight of centuries of pack law, while a massive fireplace roared, casting long, dancing shadows across the velvet rugs. It was here, in the belly of the beast, that Callista found herself every evening. Ostensibly, she was there to organize the king's correspondence, a task Victor Hollowheart had assigned her with a sneer, likely hoping the sheer volume of complaints about grain tithes would bore her to death. Instead, it gave her access to the patrol routes, access to the supply lines, access to the weak points in the Lunar Summit's armor. "Read that one aloud," Alistair said. He was pacing by the window, staring out at the snow-capped peaks of the borderlands. He wore a loose white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, exposing the dark ink of a tattoo that curled around his clavicle, a protective rune for the Alpha. Callista adjusted her glasses, her heart hammering a traitorous rhythm against her ribs. She held a parchment that detailed the shift changes of the Southern Guard, information the rogue faction had been demanding for weeks. "It is a petition from the Weavers' Guild, sire," she lied smoothly, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "They are requesting a reduction in the wool tax due to the early frost." Alistair stopped pacing. He turned, his violet eyes narrowing slightly. "The Weavers sent a petition last week. I already granted it." Callista didn't flinch. "This is a thank you note. A very long, detailed thank you note." Alistair walked toward her. The air in the room grew heavier, the scent of ozone and pine intensifying. He moved with the predatory grace of a jungle cat, silent and terrifyingly efficient. He stopped behind her chair, leaning over her shoulder. His chest brushed against her back, sending a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the inconvenient fact that the man she was sworn to destroy smelled like home. "You are a terrible liar, Callista," he murmured, his breath hot against her ear. She froze. "He knows." "It's not a thank you note," he continued, reaching down to tap the parchment. "That is the report from General Kalen regarding the rogue incursions." He hadn't seen the text. He had smelled the ink. General Kalen used a specific iron gall ink that smelled faintly of rust. Callista let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. I apologize. I didn't want to worry you. The report says the incursions have stopped." "Stopped?" Alistair scoffed, walking around the desk to sit on the edge of it, facing her. "Rogues don't stop. They wait. They are wolves without a pack, driven by madness and hunger. They are planning something. Maybe they are just hungry," Callista said quietly. "Maybe they aren't mad. Maybe they are just tired of starving while the high packs feast on venison and wine." Alistair looked at her, really looked at her. "You sound like you sympathize with them." "I sympathize with anyone who has no place in this world," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I am wolfless, remember. If I hadn't been born in a servant's quarters, I would be out there with them, freezing." Alistair's expression softened. It was a look that twisted the knife in Callista's gut. He wasn't the tyrant her father had described. He was tired. He was burdened. "You are not like them," Alistair said softly. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. The touch was electric, intimate. "You have a mind that is sharper than any fang. That is why I keep you here. Not to sort papers, but because you are the only one who tells me the truth. Except now," she thought bitterly. "Now I am lying to you with every breath." "The Southern Guard," Alistair said suddenly, changing the subject. "I am doubling the patrol there tonight. My wolf feels restless about that sector." Callista's blood ran cold. The southern sector was where the rogues were planning to breach. If Alistair doubled the guard, her contacts would walk into a slaughter. She had to stop him. "The south is a decoy," she blurted out. Alistair paused. "Explain." "Historically," she stammered, her mind racing to construct a plausible lie. "When insurgencies plan a breach, they target the resource-heavy north. The south is just cliffs and wind. Why attack there? They want the iron mines in the north. If you move the guards to the south, you leave the treasury exposed." It was a brilliant lie. It was logical. It played on his duty to protect the kingdom's wealth. Alistair studied her face. He was looking for the tell, the rapid heartbeat, the scent of deception. But Callista had no wolf to betray her. She was just a girl in a grey dress, looking at him with wide, honest eyes. "You think they are fainting?" he asked. "I think they are desperate for weapons, not scenery. I would reinforce the north." Alistair was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You have a strategist's mind, Callista." "Very well. I will move the auxiliary units to the north." He turned to the map on the wall and moved the flagged pins. Callista watched him, nausea rising in her throat. She had just saved her rogue allies. She had just opened the back door to the castle. "Stay," Alistair said, not turning around. "Have dinner with me, just us." I can't," Callista whispered, standing up. "I have to. Prepare for the solstice ball. Norabel needs help lacing her corset. Callista!" He turned. The look in his eyes was devastating. It was hope. "Do not let them break you," he said fiercely. "You are worth 10 of Norabel." Callista fled the room. She ran until her lungs burned, collapsing into the alcove of a servant's stairwell. She pulled a small, crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, the patrol schedule she had memorized and copied. She should burn it. She should throw it in the fire and go back to him. But the image of her father's execution, the memory of his head on a spike at the castle gates, flashed before her eyes. Alistair's father had done that. The crown had done that. With trembling hands, she folded the paper and tucked it into the hollow heel of her shoe. The trap was set. The winter solstice ball was the apex of the social season, a night where the lunar summit transformed into a wonderland of ice and treachery. The great conservatory, a massive dome of glass filled with exotic night-blooming flowers, was filled with the glitter of diamonds and the murmur of gossip. Callista stood by a towering fern, wearing a dress she had sewn herself. It was midnight blue, simple but elegant, made from repurposed velvet curtains found in the attic. She looked like a shadow amidst the peacocks of the court. "Well, if it isn't the king's pet mouse," a voice drawled. Leocadia swept into view, wearing a gown of sheer silver that left nothing to the imagination. On her arm was Duke Crestthorne, a man who smelled of brandy and old blood. "Leocadia," Callista nodded politely. "Your dress is brave, given the draft in here." Leocadia's eyes narrowed. "Enjoy your night, Mouse. I hear the king is announcing his betrothal tonight, and I doubt he'll choose a girl who smells like old library books." "Better books than desperation," Callista replied calmly. Leocadia stepped forward, her claws extending slightly, a breach of etiquette, but the Duke merely laughed. "You have a sharp tongue. Shame you have no wolf to back it up. Without a wolf, you are just meat." "Ladies," a deep voice rumbled. The crowd parted. Alistair appeared. He was magnificent in formal black ceremonial armor, a cape of white wolf fur cascading from his shoulders. A silver crown sat upon his brow, but it was his eyes that commanded the room. He didn't look at Leocadia. He walked straight to Callista. "You look," he said, his voice rough, "like the night sky." Callista felt a blush heat her cheeks. "And you look like you'd rather be fighting a bear." "I would," he admitted, offering her his arm. "Dance with me." "I don't know the steps, sire. I lead. You follow. It is the one time I am allowed to be in control without the council voting on it." He pulled her onto the floor. The orchestra swelled. Alistair moved with surprising grace for a man of his size. His hand was warm and firm on the small of her back, guiding her through the intricate waltz. For a moment, the world fell away. There was no rebellion, no dead father, no stolen maps in her shoe. There was just the heat of his hand, the scent of pine and snow, and the way he looked at her as if she were the only mystery he wanted to solve. "I moved the guards to the north," he whispered, pulling her close for a turn. "As you suggested." Callista stumbled. He caught her instantly. "Careful," he murmured. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she breathed, her heart shattering. "Just dizzy." "I trust you, Callista," he said, his voice intense. "More than Victor. More than the council. You are the only one who sees me." The guilt was a physical blow. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him everything. Clink, clink. A waiter walked by with a tray of champagne. He was a nondescript man with a scar on his chin. He caught Callista's eye and tapped his finger against the side of the tray twice. The signal. "I need air." Callista said abruptly, pulling away from Alistair. "I will come with you." "No!" She said it too sharply. She softened her tone. "Please, the perfume in here is overwhelming. I need a moment alone. Girl troubles." Alistair hesitated, then nodded respectfully. "Do not go far. Victor is prowling." Callista turned and walked toward the side exit of the conservatory, leading to the snowy gardens. She grabbed a glass of champagne from the scarred waiter as she passed. "The napkin," she whispered. The waiter slipped a folded napkin into her hand under the glass. "The drop is at the fountain. Midnight." Callista walked out into the cold night air. The snow crunched under her velvet slippers. She reached the stone fountain, frozen in a cascade of ice. She looked at the napkin. Inside was a small vial of clear liquid. Poison. No, the Resistance didn't use poison. It was a sleeping draught for the guards at the inner gate. She was supposed to pour it into the guard's wine barrel. She stood there, the vial in her hand, the map in her shoe, and the king's trust heavy on her soul. A beautiful night for treason. Callista spun around. Victor Hollowheart stood in the shadows of a cypress tree. He wasn't smiling. He held a cane topped with a silver wolf's head, and behind him stood 2 royal guards. "I don't know what you mean," Callista said, her hand closing tight around the vial. "Oh, I think you do." Victor stepped into the moonlight. "I have watched you, Callista. I watched you in the library. I watched you in the study. And I watched you dance with him. You are in love with him, aren't you?" "That is absurd." "Is it? Then why are you hesitating?" Victor pointed his cane at the vial in her hand. "That isn't for the guards. That is for the Alpha. A suppressant, to weaken his wolf so your friends can kill him." "No," Callista gasped. "They said no killing. They said they just wanted leverage, a hostage negotiation." Victor laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, child, you are smart with books, but you are an idiot with war. There is no negotiation with Alphas. There is only dominance or death. Your friends are coming to slaughter us all, and you opened the gate." He signaled the guards. "Seize her." "Wait," Callista shouted. "If you knew, why didn't you stop me earlier?" Victor smiled, a cruel, thin thing. "Because, my dear, I needed Alistair to see it. He needs to see his honest little pet betray him. It is the only way to break his fascination with you. I let you do it. I let you move the guards to the north. The south is wide open." Callista's eyes widened in horror. You let the border fall? A small sacrifice." Victor shrugged. "A few dead villagers in the south to save the king from a mongrel whore. A fair trade." He lunged. Callista didn't think. She threw the vial of sleeping draught into Victor's face. The glass shattered. The concentrated liquid splashed into his eyes and mouth. Victor gagged, clawing at his face as the potent magical sedative hit his system instantly. He crumpled to the snow. The guards hesitated, shocked. Callista hiked up her dress and ran. She didn't run toward the gate. She ran back toward the ballroom, back toward Alistair. She had to tell him. She had to save the South. Callista burst into the ballroom, looking like a wraith. Her hair was wild, her hem soaked in snow, her chest heaving. The music stopped. The dancers froze. Alistair was at the head of the room, raising a toast. He saw her and lowered his glass, his brow furrowing in concern. He started to descend the dais. "Callista!" "The South!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Alistair, it's a trap! They are attacking the South!" A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. "She's drunk," Leocadia laughed nervously. "Get her out of here." "I am not drunk." Callista ran forward, dodging a guard who tried to grab her. She threw herself at the foot of the dais. "The North was a feint. I lied to you. I told you to move the guards so they could breach the southern pass." Alistair stopped. He went very still. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a terrifying, icy clarity. You lied? Yes, I am the contact, she sobbed, grabbing the hem of his cloak. My father, the resistance, I did it. But I didn't know they would kill anyone. Victor let it happen. He knew. Before Alistair could respond, the massive double doors of the ballroom blew open. A soldier stumbled in, blood soaking his tabard. He fell to his knees, gasping. Your Majesty, the soldier choked out. The southern gate, it's gone. Rogues, hundreds of them. They burned the village. They are marching on the capital. The room erupted into chaos. Screams, shattering glass. The smell of fear spiked so high it was choking. Alistair didn't look at the soldier. He looked down at Callista. The betrayal on his face was worse than rage. It was a breaking. The connection they had built, the fragile trust, shattered into dust. You sent my army north, Alistair said, his voice devoid of all emotion. You left my people defenseless. I tried to fix it, Callista pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Alistair, please, I am telling you now. Too late, he whispered. Victor Hollowheart stumbled into the room, supported by 2 guards. His face was red and blistered from the potion, his eyes groggy but triumphant. She confesses, Victor croaked, pointing a shaking finger at her. She attacked me. She is a spy for the rogue king. She tried to poison me to hide her treachery. Alistair looked from Victor to Callista. Is this true? Alistair asked. Are you with them? Callista looked into his violet eyes. She couldn't lie. Not anymore. Yes, she whispered. The roar that ripped from Alistair's throat was not human. It was pure, primal wolf. He shifted, his bones cracking, his form expanding. In seconds, a massive black wolf stood where the king had been, a beast of nightmare and shadow, with eyes of burning violet. The wolf snarled at her, jaws snapping inches from her face. Callista flinched, expecting death. But the wolf didn't bite. It looked at her with a profound, intelligent sadness. Then, Alistair, the wolf, turned and charged out of the broken doors, into the night, toward the burning south, followed by his warriors. Callista was left kneeling on the floor. Arrest her, Victor commanded, wiping slime from his face. Rough hands grabbed Callista's arms. They dragged her backward. Wait, she screamed, struggling. I can help. I know their plans. You have done enough helping, Victor hissed, leaning close to her face. The king will die tonight in the south. The rogues have a weapon designed specifically for him. And when he falls, I will rule as steward. And you, my dear, you will be the public sacrifice. He signaled the guards. Take her to the Iron Tower, the deepest cell. As they dragged her away, Callista saw the map of the kingdom on the wall. The southern border was burning. She hadn't just broken the king's heart. She had signed his death warrant. And as the darkness of the dungeon swallowed her, Callista realized something terrifying. Her wolflessness wasn't a defect. It was the only thing that could save him. The rogues were tracking the alpha signatures. They were hunting wolves. They wouldn't see her coming. If she could just escape. The Iron Tower did not smell of power. It smelled of wet stone, rat droppings, and the slow, oxidizing scent of despair. Callista sat in the center of the cell, her knees pulled to her chest. The temperature was freezing, a deliberate design to weaken the wolf spirit of any prisoner. But Callista had no wolf to weaken. She only had her human fragility, which, ironically, made her more resilient to the magical suppression runes etched into the bars. They hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency. To a shifter, it would feel like a migraine splitting their skull. To Callista, it was just an annoying, buzzing sound, like a trapped fly. Comfortable, my dear? Victor Hollowheart stood on the other side of the bars. He looked immaculate, though a bandage covered the side of his face, where her potion had burned him. He held a lantern, the light casting skeletal shadows against the curved walls. "I've had better accommodations," Callista said, her voice hoarse but steady. "The service here is terrible." Victor chuckled darkly. "You still have your wit. A pity. It will be the first thing to go when the executioner takes your tongue." "Why, Victor?" she asked, standing up and walking to the bars. "You are the Grand Vizier. You have everything." "I have influence," he corrected, his face twisting. "I do not have control. Alistair is volatile. He thinks with his claws. He refuses to marry for politics. He refuses to tax the poor. He is weak. He is strong because he cares," Callista countered. "He is a dog," Victor spat, "a glorified beast, and tonight he dies like one. The rogues have the sonic emitters. Do you know what those do to an alpha's hearing? It turns their own heightened senses against them. He will go mad on the battlefield. He will tear his own throat out to stop the noise." Callista's blood ran cold. Sonic emitters. That was the weapon. A frequency weapon. "And you," Victor smiled, unlocking the cell door with a heavy iron key, "are coming with me. We need a witness to the king's tragic fall, and who better than the traitor who sent him to his death?" He stepped inside, flanked by 2 guards. Callista looked at the open door. She looked at Victor's smug face. And she remembered a passage from The Physics of Sound, Volume 3, which she had read during a boring banquet last month. High-frequency resonance can be disrupted by a sudden, percussive discord. "You are right, Victor," Callista said softly, bowing her head in mock defeat. "I am just a wolfless girl. I am nothing. Finally you admit it." Victor reached out to grab her arm. Callista moved. She didn't have speed, but she had leverage. She grabbed the heavy iron bucket she had been using for water and swung it with every ounce of her strength, not at Victor, but at the suppression rune carved into the stone wall. Clang! The iron bucket hit the magical conduit. The impact shattered the delicate crystal embedded in the stone. The reaction was instantaneous. The magical energy, having nowhere to flow, backfired. A shockwave of raw, ungrounded magic exploded outward. Victor and the guards, all wolves, screamed and dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as the magical feedback overloaded their sensitive nerves. Callista, completely immune to the magical frequency, stood unharmed in the center of the blast. She didn't hesitate. She stepped over Victor's writhing body, snatched the key ring from his belt, and ran. She bolted up the spiral stairs, her lungs burning. She burst into the courtyard. The castle was in chaos, servants running, guards shouting about the battle in the south. She needed a horse. She found Alistair's secondary mount, a white mare named Ghost, tethered near the smithy. She scrambled onto the saddle, hiking up her torn dress. She had never ridden at a gallop before. She barely knew how to hold the reins. "Run!" she whispered to the horse, gripping the mane with white-knuckled desperation. "Run, or we all die." The horse, sensing the urgency, or perhaps just terrified of the smoke rising in the distance, bolted. They thundered out of the castle gates, straight into the dark, frozen maw of the night, toward the fire on the horizon. The southern pass was a slaughterhouse. The snow, usually a pristine white blanket, was churned into a slush of mud and crimson. The air was thick with the sounds of snarling, the clash of steel, and a high-pitched drilling screech that made Callista's teeth ache even from a mile away. The sonic emitters. Callista rode Ghost onto the ridge overlooking the valley. Below, the battle was raging. The royal guard was being decimated. They were shifting uncontrollably, their forms flickering between man and wolf, disoriented by the sound weapon. And in the center of the fray was a massive black wolf, Alistair. He was fighting like a demon, tearing through the rogue lines, but he was stumbling. He was shaking his head violently, pawing at his ears. The rogues, wearing heavy lead-lined ear coverings, were closing in with spears. They were circling him, baiting him. No, Callista gasped. She saw the source of the sound. 3 large brass machines mounted on wagons behind the rogue lines. They were pulsing with green light, emitting the frequency that was crippling the king. Callista didn't have a sword. She didn't have magic. She had a bag of black powder she had swiped from the castle armory on her way out, and a flint box. "Come on, Ghost," she sobbed, kicking the horse's flanks. "One more time." She didn't ride toward Alistair. She rode toward the machines. The rogues didn't see her at first. They were focused on the Alpha. Who would worry about a single girl on a white horse? She galloped through the flank, dodging arrows that whizzed past her ears. A rogue lunged at her, his claws raking the horse's flank. Ghost screamed, but kept running. Callista reached the first wagon. The sound here was deafening, physical. It vibrated in her chest. She lit the fuse on the first sack of powder and threw it into the brass horn of the machine. "Eat this!" she screamed. Boom! The machine exploded in a shower of gears and brass shrapnel. The sound cut out instantly on that side of the valley. The relief was palpable. The royal guards on the left flank suddenly stopped shaking and roared, counter-attacking with renewed fury. But there were still 2 machines. Callista wheeled her horse around. The rogues had spotted her now. "Stop her!" a commander shouted. "It's the girl!" 3 rogues shifted into wolves and charged her. Callista pulled the second sack of powder. She tried to light the flint, but her hands were shaking too badly. The wolves were closing in. 10 feet. 5 feet. A black blur slammed into them. Alistair. He had broken free from the circle. He was a whirlwind of fur and fury, tearing the rogue wolves apart before they could touch Ghost. He looked up at her, his muzzle stained with blood, his violet eyes wild and unseeing. The madness was still on him. He growled at her, not recognizing her. "Alistair," she shouted over the noise of the remaining machines. "It's me. It's the soup girl." He paused, his ears twitching. The scent of paper and rain cut through the blood. He didn't attack. He turned his back to her, shielding her and the horse from the oncoming wave of rogues. He was acting as her wall. "Go!" his wolf mind seemed to project. Callista lit the second fuse. She threw it. Boom! The second machine shattered. Only one left. The largest one. The one aimed directly at Alistair. Callista reached for her last sack of powder. It was gone. She had dropped it during the charge. She stared at the machine in horror. The operator, a massive rogue with a scarred eye, saw she was empty-handed. He grinned and aimed the sonic cannon directly at Ghost. Callista did the only thing she could think of. She didn't have gunpowder. She had momentum. She steered Ghost directly at the wagon. "Jump!" she screamed to the horse. She kicked her feet free of the stirrups and threw herself off the saddle seconds before impact. The horse collided with the wagon at full gallop. The impact was catastrophic. Wood splintered, brass crumpled, and the fuel tank of the machine ruptured. Callista hit the frozen ground hard. The world went black for a second. When she opened her eyes, the machine was burning. The sound was gone. Silence, blessed, ringing silence, fell over the battlefield. Then a howl rose up, a howl of pure, unadulterated triumph. The royal guard, freed from the torture, surged forward. Without their weapon, the rogues broke. They turned and fled into the mountains. Callista tried to stand, but her leg screamed in agony. Broken, she lay back in the snow, watching the smoke drift across the stars. A shadow fell over her. The massive black wolf stood there. He was panting, bleeding from a dozen wounds. He lowered his massive head, sniffing her face. He whined, a sound so tender it broke her heart. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the bones shifted. The fur receded. Alistair, naked and covered in gore, collapsed onto his knees beside her. He didn't care about the army watching. He didn't care about the cold. He scooped her up into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "You came back," he rasped, his voice broken. "Why?" Callista reached up, touching his face with a trembling hand. "Because the soup at the rogue camp is terrible." Alistair laughed. It was a wet, choked sound. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her mouth, a desperate, searing kiss that tasted of iron and life. "I am going to marry you," he whispered against her lips. "And if anyone objects, I will eat them." The return to the capital was not a march. It was a procession of miracles. The king rode at the front, but he did not ride alone. He held Callista in front of him on his stallion, her broken leg splintered with royal velvet, his cloak wrapped around her like a shield. They entered the throne room, where the remaining nobles were cowering. Victor Hollowheart, bound in chains, knelt before the dais. His coup had failed the moment the sonic weapon was destroyed. Alistair carried Callista to the throne. He didn't sit on it. He sat her on it. A gasp went through the court. An Omega, a wolfless human, sitting on the wolf throne? It was sacrilege. Alistair turned to face them. He looked terrifying. His wounds were bandaged, but the rage still simmered under his skin. "Victor Hollowheart," Alistair said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You are charged with high treason. You conspired with rogues. You built weapons to hunt your own kind, and you tried to kill the woman who saved us all." "She is a traitor!" Victor screamed, spitting blood. "She admitted it. She is the daughter of the traitor scientist." "My father," Callista said, her voice cutting through the room from the throne, "was not a traitor. He was a biologist. He discovered that the wolf gene was becoming unstable. He was trying to cure the madness, not cause it. You killed him because he knew the truth, that the pure bloods are dying out." The court murmured. "And as for me," Callista continued, looking at the council. "Yes, I gave the rogues the patrol schedules. I opened the gate. I did it because I thought I was saving my father's memory. I was wrong. I was manipulated." She looked at Alistair. "I am guilty of treason, sire. The law is clear. The penalty is death." Alistair walked up the steps of the dais. He stood before her, blocking her from the view of the court. "The law," Alistair said quietly, "was written by men who were afraid of losing power." He turned to the court. "You want an alpha queen, a woman who can shift and breed strong heirs. Look where that got us. Inbreeding, madness, arrogance." He took Callista's hand. "This woman has no wolf. She has no claws. She has no magic. And yet, she charged a machine that brought an army of alphas to their knees. She saved me when I was a beast. She saved you when you were cowering." He took the crown from his head. It was heavy, gold, and ancient. "There is no wolf in her," Alistair declared. "There is only a lion heart." He placed the crown on her lap. "I, Alistair Kingshold, Alpha of the United Packs, do hereby rewrite the law of succession. Strength shall no longer be measured by the beast within, but by the spirit that commands it." He knelt. The King of the Wolves knelt before the girl in the grey dress. "Will you have me, Callista? Flaws and all?" Callista looked at the man who had been her enemy, her target, and now her savior. She touched the crown in her lap, then looked into his violet eyes. "Only if I can reorganize the library," she said, with a tearful smile. "You can burn the library for all I care," he grinned. He kissed her, and this time the court didn't gasp. They bowed, not out of fear, but out of awe. Victor was dragged away to the dungeons. The winter snow began to melt outside, revealing the first green shoots of spring. They say love is blind, but in the kingdom of Lunar Summit, love was the only thing that could see. Callista and Alistair ruled for 60 years. They were known as the Golden Era, not because of their wealth, but because of their peace. Callista never gained a wolf, and Alistair never lost his wildness, but they balanced each other perfectly. The ink and the claw, the silence and the roar. She taught him that power without wisdom is just violence. He taught her that wisdom without action is just cowardice. Together, they proved that you don't need to share a soul to share a heart. And in the end, the Wolfless Omega didn't just impress the Alpha King. She saved him from himself. We all have parts of us that feel wolfless, broken, missing, or not enough. But remember, it is often our cracks that let the light in, and our differences that make us the only ones capable of saving the day. If you enjoyed this story of defiance and destiny, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales where the underdog takes the crown.